These are the 7 levels of Fallout vaults. Level 1, Trash Vaults. These are the boring ones, the ones that actually worked like advertised. Out of 122 vaults built across America, only 17 were straight-up normal shelters where people could ride out the apocalypse without Vault-Tec pulling some twisted experiment. Places like Vault 8 and Vault 76 fall into this category. They got their GEC terraforming kits, their water chips didn't mysteriously fail, nobody was secretly dosing the air supply with hallucinogens, and they weren't filled with a man named Gary. Vault 8 in Nevada is the poster child here. It only opened 4 years later than it was supposed to. The dwellers used their Garden of Eden creation kit to terraform the wasteland, and boom, they founded Vault City by 2091. The place became this weirdly functional post-apocalyptic settlement with actual infrastructure and governance. Vault 76 in West Virginia is another control vault, the one you start in during Fallout 76. It was designed to open exactly 25 years after the bombs dropped on Reclamation Day, and it actually did. No weird twists or surprise cannibalism, just a bunch of people walking out into the wasteland to rebuild America like the brochures promised. These vaults matter because they prove Vault-Tec could have saved people if they wanted to. They had the technology and resources to build genuine Fallout shelters, but instead they chose to run sick experiments on 105 of the 122 vaults they constructed. But here's the thing, if Vault-Tec could build 17 working vaults, why make 105 death traps? Keep that question in mind, because the answer isn't what you think. Now let's see what happened when they started testing isolation. Level 2, Isolation Vaults. This level is where Vault-Tec started testing how humans handle being completely cut off from everything. Vault 101 from Fallout 3 is the most famous example. The tagline was literally Vault 101, Jewel of the Wastes, but the real experiment was that nobody was ever supposed to leave, ever. The Overseer had standing orders to keep that vault sealed indefinitely, and anyone who even talked about opening the door was labeled a dissident. Your character's dad breaking this rule by escaping to find a water purifier is what kicks off the entire main quest of Fallout 3. Vault 13 from the original Fallout also falls here, though with a different spin. It was designed to stay sealed for 200 years to study prolonged isolation, but their water chip conveniently failed after just a few decades, forcing them to send someone out into the wasteland. That someone becomes the Vault Dweller, the protagonist of the first game, who has to trek across California looking for replacement parts. The whole water chip failure might have been intentional sabotage by Vault-Tec to see what happens when isolated communities face extinction-level equipment failures. Vault 21 in New Vegas took isolation in a weird direction by making everything inside decided by gambling. Every dispute, every decision, every allocation of resources came down to games of chance. It worked surprisingly well until Mr. House showed up and won the vault in a game of blackjack, then filled most of it with concrete. The isolation experiments reveal Vault-Tec's obsession with control and obedience. They wanted to know if they could create perfectly insulated societies that would follow orders without question. Communities so indoctrinated they'd never challenge authority even when it meant their own doom. These vaults often developed cult-like social structures where the Overseer was basically a dictator and questioning the system was heresy. The psychological damage from these experiments lasted generations, creating societies that couldn't adapt when they finally did open and face the real wasteland. But isolation was just psychology. What comes next is where Vault-Tec started weaponizing human needs themselves, and one vault proves they'd even weaponize people's recovery just to watch them destroy each other. Level 3, Survival Experiments. Now Vault-Tec wanted to see what happens when you give people just barely enough, or way too much of something specific. Vault 34 is the perfect example of too much. This vault near Vegas was stuffed with an absolutely insane amount of weapons and ammunition, way more than any civilian shelter would ever need. The experiment was basically what happens when everyone has unlimited access to guns in a confined space. Spoiler alert, they formed armed factions, fought over the reactor, and when it leaked radiation, most of them died. The survivors became the Boomers, that artillery-obsessed faction at Nellis Air Force Base who shoot at literally anyone who gets close. Vault 22 tested resource scarcity from a different angle, focusing on food production. They were experimenting with mutated plant spores to create fast-growing crops, which sounds genius until you learn the spores turned people into hostile plant zombie things. The scientists kept pushing their experiments even as dwellers started transforming, and eventually the whole vault became overrun with these spore carriers. You explore this nightmare in New Vegas, fighting through fungus-infected tunnels and mutated plants while reading terminal entries about how the scientists knew exactly what was happening and kept going anyway. Vault 95 weaponized addiction and recovery. It was advertised as a rehabilitation facility for chem addicts, a clean space where people could get sober and stay sober. For 5 years it actually worked. People kicked their habits and built a supportive community. Then, as planned, Vault-Tec had a plan plan open a secret stash of chems in the walls. The resulting relapse destroyed everything. Dwellers turned on each other, and the vault fell apart. When you find it in Fallout 4, it's occupied by gunners who are using it as a base, completely unaware of the deliberately engineered tragedy that happened there. These experiments were Vault-Tec's way of studying human behavior under extreme conditions, specifically how societies function when basic needs become weapons. The data they collected was supposedly for planning long-term space colonization, figuring out minimum resource requirements for generation ships or Mars colonies, but really it was just corporate-funded sadism dressed up as science, watching people suffer for spreadsheets and graphs, or so it seemed, because every experiment was teaching Vault-Tec something specific about human breaking points. The question is, why did they need to know? Level 4, Social Experiment. This is where Vault-Tec crossed a different line. They weren't just studying how people break. They were discovering how to make people build entire societies around their own destruction. Vault 11 proves it, and what the computer told the last 5 survivors reveals exactly what Vault-Tec learned about human nature. Vault 11 is hands down one of the darkest experiments in the entire franchise. The Vault's computer told residents they had to sacrifice one person every year or everyone would die. They developed this whole electoral system where they'd vote for an overseer, who would then be executed. Candidates used propaganda, bribery, and blackmail to avoid winning. Voting blocks formed, people manipulated elections, and this went on for years until one election cycle failed and only 5 people remained. They refused to sacrifice anyone, and when they finally told the computer no, it revealed the whole thing was a test and they'd actually passed by refusing. But by then, 4 of them killed each other in the aftermath, and only one survived, completely broken. That's the discovery Vault-Tec was after. Give humans the right rules, and they'll create systems that destroy them without question. They'll accept authority even when it's killing them. This data was worth everything to someone. But who? Vault 118 up in Far Harbor ran a class experiment. They divided the vault into sectors for rich elites and poor workers. But the workers section was never completed, so it ended up being just 10 ultra-wealthy people isolated together. And they eventually transferred their consciousnesses into robot bodies to achieve immortality. When you arrive, they're still there as these brainbots, completely unaware that centuries have passed and they're essentially digital ghosts acting out their pre-war aristocratic fantasies. Vault 19 in the Mojave tested paranoia by deliberately dividing dwellers into 2 groups, red and blue, and giving them separate sections of the vault. The computer systems were rigged to make each side think the other was sabotaging them. Subliminal messages, fake alerts, manipulated supply counts, all designed to manufacture conflict where none existed. Eventually, both groups abandoned the vault rather than fight, which is almost a happy ending by Vault-Tec standards. Vault 112 might be the cruelest. Dr. Braun, the overseer, trapped everyone in virtual reality pods running a simulation he controlled. For over 200 years, he's been psychologically torturing them, forcing them to live through scenario after scenario where he plays God. They can't die, can't escape, just endless cycles of whatever twisted narrative Braun feels like inflicting. Your interaction with this vault in Fallout 3 involves entering the simulation, and either helping the residents escape or helping Braun torture them more. Because even the player isn't safe from these moral nightmares. The social experiments prove Vault-Tec understood human psychology well enough to break it systematically. These weren't random acts of cruelty. They were carefully designed scenarios testing specific hypotheses about authority, conformity, and social collapse. The Enclave wanted this data for colonization projects, figuring out exactly how much stress a closed society could handle before fracturing. Level 5, Evolution Experiments. Everything up to now was psychology and social control, but these next vaults reveal something darker. Vault-Tec wasn't trying to save humanity. They were trying to replace it, and in Vault 87, they actually succeeded. Vault 87 sits at the top of this category. This vault in the Capital Wasteland wasn't a shelter at all. It was a research facility testing the forced evolutionary virus. They were supposed to study FEV effects on human subjects, but study quickly became mass mutation experiment. Nearly every dweller was transformed into super mutants, those giant green monsters that populate the Capital Wasteland. The vault became ground zero for the East Coast super mutant population, and you can find it in Fallout 3, still crawling with mutants and radiation so intense that approaching from certain directions will kill you instantly. One of the few survivors who kept his mind is Fox, the super mutant companion you can recruit who was intelligent enough to realize what happened and hates Vault-Tec for it. Vault 92 ran audio-based mind control experiments. They filled this vault with musicians, supposedly to preserve performing arts through the apocalypse. But the real plan involved subliminal messaging hidden in white noise played constantly through the vault's speaker system. The messages were supposed to create super soldiers by conditioning extreme aggression and obedience to commands. Instead, everyone went violently insane, killing each other in brutal rampages. When you explore it in Fallout 3, you find terminal entries from a violinist who slowly realizes the music is changing him, making him angry and violent, but he can't stop it or escape. Vault 96 in Fallout 76 was sold as an animal preservation project, basically Noah's Ark for wasteland creatures. What residents didn't know was that Vault-Tec was using them to test aggressive mutation serums on the animals. They had quotas for genetic modifications, pushing mutations harder and faster to see what would happen. Predictably, the creatures became unstable and dangerous, and after the dwellers died to the Vault's mainframe activating a superseding security protocol during their failed escape attempt, the mutated creatures escaped. The specimens went into Appalachia, which explains some of the more horrifying mutated wildlife you encounter. Vault 75. Beneath a middle school ran a eugenics program focused on children. Kids were separated from parents on entry, told their families died, and raised in an underground facility that constantly tested them through brutal competition. The weakest were reclaimed, which Vault-Tec speaks of being murdered and harvested for genetic material. The strongest were bred to create perfect specimens. The scientists pushed this for generations until the teenagers eventually figured it out and revolted, killing all the researchers. You can explore this vault in Fallout 4 and read the heartbreaking terminal entries from both the kids and the scientists who rationalized atrocity as progress. Each experiment maps perfectly to a specific problem, but what problem were they solving? That's next. These biological experiments represent Vault-Tec at its most callous, treating human life as raw material for science. The goal was ostensibly to understand genetic manipulation and create enhanced humans for space colonization, but the methods were straight out of the worst moments in human history. Eugenics programs and unethical medical experimentation cranked up to apocalyptic extremes. Level 6. Experimental vaults. These vaults tested one final variable: minimum viable systems. How little technology do you need to keep humans alive in a closed environment? Because if you're noticing that every experiment sounds like preparation for something, you're right, and what comes after this explains everything. Vault 88, which you can explore and build in Fallout 4's DLC, was designed to test prototype Vault-Tec technologies on unwitting subjects. The Overseer, who survived as a ghoul, was working on devices like exercise bikes that drained life force, soda machines that dispensed chems, and slot machines rigged for behavior modification. The Vault was never finished before the bombs dropped, so the experiments never ran at full scale. But you can choose to complete them yourself or sabotage the Overseer's plans and make the technology actually helpful. Vault 114 took a different approach, experimenting with leadership structures through architecture. This vault beneath a subway station in Boston was deliberately designed to be uncomfortable. The Overseer's room was a transparent office in the middle of everything with zero privacy, and the whole vault was built to create constant tension between authority figures and residents. The idea was to test if leaders could maintain control when they had no special privileges or private space. Construction never finished before the war, so the experiment never ran, but the criminal Skinny Malone moved in and made it his headquarters in Fallout 4. Vault 108 had a cloning lab because Vault-Tec wanted to know what happens when you can mass-produce humans. The Overseer was terminally ill, and the plan was to clone one resident named Gary over and over to study hive mind dynamics and identity degradation. Instead, the Garys gained sentience as a collective, realized they were being used, and turned on everyone else. By the time you reach this vault in Fallout 3, it's entirely populated by hostile Gary clones who can only say their own name, creating this deeply unsettling atmosphere where every enemy is the same person copied hundreds of times. Vault 106 tested chemical warfare technology through psychoactive drugs pumped into the ventilation system. The gas was supposed to induce hallucinations and paranoia, which it absolutely did. 10 days after the vault sealed, dwellers started experiencing vivid hallucinations and violent delusions. The vault descended into chaos as people attacked hallucinations that looked like their friends and family. Centuries later, when you explore it, the gas is still active, causing the lone wanderer to hallucinate during exploration, seeing fake enemies and distorted versions of reality. The technology experiments show Vault-Tec's complete disregard for safety protocols or ethics. They were testing prototype devices that should have gone through decades of trials, instead throwing them into live environments with real people. The Enclave wanted data on cutting-edge tech for their projects, and Vault-Tec was happy to provide it regardless of cost. These vaults often left behind functioning but dangerous technology that wastelanders stumbled into, creating new threats centuries after the original experiments ended. Level 7. Legendary Vaults. Here's what every single experiment was actually for. Vault-Tec and the Enclave weren't preparing to survive nuclear war, they were preparing to leave Earth entirely. According to Fallout's co-creator Tim Kaine, Vault-Tec and the Enclave designed these experiments to gather data for an interstellar colonization project. They believed Earth might become completely uninhabitable uninhabitable and wanted to understand how humans would survive on generation ships traveling to other planets. Every experiment tested a different variable relevant to space travel. Isolation mirrors deep space missions, resource scarcity reflects limited ship supplies, social engineering explores governance and closed systems, biological experiments prepare for alien environments, and technology tests determine minimum viable systems. The Enclave, remnants of the US government, monitored all the vaults from remote locations, collecting data transmitted from each overseer. They plan to USC this research to select the strongest survivors for their ARC project if Earth truly became unlivable. The vaults were essentially massive lab rats, with 105 out of 122 facilities running some kind of experiment while the 17 control vaults provided baseline data. The vaults were never shelters. They were simulations of generation ships, and every person who walked into one thinking they'd be saved became a test subject for humanity's escape plan. But here's where it gets even darker. Vault-Tec sold this to the government by framing it as necessary preparation for humanity's survival, the ultimate contingency plan that required extreme measures. The Fallout TV series that dropped in 2024 adds another layer to this. It reveals Vault-Tec executives meeting before the war, discussing their experiments and plans. Vaults 31 through 33 form a connected system where Vault 31 holds cryogenically frozen Vault-Tec management who periodically wake up to oversee and manipulate the other two vaults, essentially creating a perpetual corporation that outlives the apocalypse. The show hints that Vault-Tec might have had a hand in starting the Great War itself, ensuring their vaults would be needed and their experiments could proceed. While that's not confirmed in game canon, it fits the pattern of corporate evil that defines Vault-Tec's legacy. What makes this endgame truly disturbing is the scale of the lie. Vault-Tec spent billions of dollars, involved thousands of employees, and built 122 facilities, all while maintaining the facade of salvation. The advertising, the Vault Boy mascot giving thumbs up, the cheerful instructional videos about surviving atomic war, it was all marketing for the largest unethical human experiment in history. Families bought into this promise of safety, paid for vault spots, and walked into their assigned shelters thinking they'd secured their future. Instead, they became test subjects in scenarios designed to break them. The data collected from these experiments supposedly justified the suffering, providing insights into human psychology and society under extreme stress. But even if the Enclave used this information for space colonization, it doesn't change what happened to the people trapped in vaults, living their entire lives as unwitting participants in someone else's grand design. Vault survivors who emerged into the wasteland, either because their vault failed or succeeded, spread across America and influenced the formation of major factions. The new California Republic traces its roots to vault dwellers. The Brotherhood of Steel interacted with vault technology constantly, and super mutants from vault experiments shaped entire regions. The Vault-Tec Corporation itself was deeply embedded in pre-war America, with university campuses, demonstration vaults, and promotional centers spreading their brand. Vault-Tec University in Fallout 76 was a training facility for vault personnel, but even there, Vault-Tec ran experiments, starving the students to test emergency rationing protocols. The demonstration vault in Los Angeles, which appears in Fallout 1, was meant to show off vault technology to potential customers, but later became the master's base of operations, proving that even Vault-Tec's public relations efforts came back to haunt the wasteland. Vault-Tec didn't fail, they succeeded. Every experiment proved what they wanted to know: humans adapt. We suffer, obey, rebuild, and survive. Even after centuries of cruelty, their systems still echo through the wasteland. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every deleted vault experiment, click the video on the screen.